At 10:03, the City Council is in session for this workshop.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I'll kick things off, and you'll see kind of a tag team between me and EA and Amy on the budget piece, and then, of course, the executive session will be Mike leading that discussion. So on the first slide here, let me get here to do this. This is our agenda for the workshop on the budget. Again, this will be a tag team of the staff and very informal. So if you have any questions along the way, just stop and say, ask the question then so you don't forget it and, we get to the end and you don't get your question answered. Very high level. So this is very, very early in the process, but I think it's just critical that we get your input as we have tried to do in the past early so that we don't have to scramble later and try to make sure that we're, including everything that the council wants. Of course, we'll have another discussion about the budget at your retreat in May. But this will give us at least a little more guidance going into that retreat about what to pursue and what kind of information to have available for you. So on the next slide, we get right into the budget discussion. These are actually revenues, this pie graph for the current year, because we don't have the budget established, obviously, for the next year. But just a high-level overview of all funds. So this is not just general fund, it's all funds. You can see services there being 37%. That's going to be mostly water and sewer. And then, of course, property taxes come in a second. And then sales tax. And y'all have heard me say before that, sure would like to see that sales tax percentage higher than it is to take some pressure off of our property tax. And of course, that has to do with our regional recruitment for retail and other retail strategies. Now talking about property tax, we do have our preliminary roll due at the end of this month. We gave you some early information in my weekly report last week showing a 6% increase so far, and 1% of that 6%, or about 28 million, is actually new value. So reappraisals are the other 5%. You can see there the cap of 3.5%. This was imposed by the legislature a while back, and there is some additional proposed legislation that would cut that even further. I'm not sure if it's got any legs at this point or not, but right now we're living with that 3.5% revenue increase cap.
So that 3.5 is on everything, not just homestead property, all property. It's 3 point.
That's right.
Okay.
It is only on existing property though.
Okay.
If you grow revenue through new additions, that's not part of it.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so then we get the certified roll, July 26th, right before the deadline. I've got to submit a budget to y'all on the 30th. So it's usually a tweak and a scramble right there at the very end about what do we do with the, any tweaks in terms of the final certified roll. And you'll recall last year, we even had a lot of property that was still outstanding that hadn't been settled yet. So there was a little bit of guesswork, but we worked through it with some great expertise from Amy and others.
Mark, on a personal note, or Amy, any word from the appraisal district on releasing information to the public when that's supposed to happen, as far as the appraised values going out?
Oh, the appraisal notices?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard.
It should be in May.
In May?
Right after this, preliminary roll is due.
Okay, so we should look early May.
You don't have to go back to the slide, but what did you say was the percentage from sales tax?
14 something? 14.
Yeah, it's 14.4%. Okay, next slide is sales tax. As you all know, we have had a very strong performance in this fiscal year so far. We did have a flat month, the most recent month, and on the next slide, Amy's going to get into a little bit more detail on that. We're hearing everything from, locally here, from what Gil sees, nationally, and then all the indicators are looking pretty good as far as the economic outlook. Federal Reserve predictions you can see there as far as the GDP and unemployment, inflation, all very positive. We do see some increases in inflation though, and so we are, factoring some of that into our budget build, if you will. So you'll see some inflationary increases in some items, which is underway as we speak. And then federal stimulus and infrastructure bills will add some energy to the economy. We don't know what that really is going to look like, but with the infusion that we're seeing, no doubt it will have some level of impact here locally as well as nationally. And then again, just like with property tax, we do have some state legislation that could impact our sales tax collections, having to do with destination-based or point of sale or what have you. There's lots of swirling around in the legislature right now about how they're going to account for sales tax.
So is there anything proactively that we can look at as far as the different scenarios if it passes? I mean, we know what happens if we can predict if it doesn't based on what we know, but if it does, do we know the impact?
I'll let Amy talk about that on this next slide because we're going
Okay.
to talk a little bit more detail on sales tax. But yeah, I mean, we've kind of run some preliminary scenarios on what that might look like. But Amy, why don't you talk to us about sales tax?
All right, well, to, answer your question, about what would happen if this bill passes, there's kind of a lot of different iterations of this bill
Okay.
and some stimulation, or, stipulations about, this would count, this wouldn't count, that kind of
That
thing.
makes it hard.
But basically, if we went to a all destination, based sales tax system, it would have a pretty significant detrimental impact to the city, several $100,000 in lost revenue. We can see totals by payer, but if we see one particular sales taxpayers total, we don't know how much of that is from their internet business versus their retail business here, that kind of thing. So that part we don't really know, but there would be a impact. And we did, the mayor did send a letter
Bless you.
opposing this legislation, and it sounds like other cities have done the same. So we're hopeful that that it's not going to move forward. And the legislature did already put some additional restrictions on sales tax a couple of years ago, and they go into effect over time. But our sales tax payers meet all of these more stringent restrictions about having to have manufacturing and fulfillment all in the same place and that kind of thing. So as it is right now, we're fine. It's just if it, hopefully nothing changes from where we are right
And
now.
if the legislature doesn't do anything, then the comptroller's rules will become law, the way they're doing it now.
Okay.
And also to address something that the mayor was asking about previously about the percentage of revenue that sales tax represents. So it is the 14% when you're looking at the city overall, but it's also important to think of it in terms of the general fund. So that's our largest fund, and our operating fund that's police, fire, parks, streets, all of those big things. And sales tax is about 25% of that fund. So.
Okay, so you get the 14%, you get 25%. How are those distinguished? I mean, I know one's in the general fund.
Well, the 14% is the entire budget,
Entire
including
city,
general
yeah.
fund, water fund, golf fund,
Okay.
every fund. So in our entire annual budget, it'd be
Yeah.
14. And then as Amy said, for just general fund alone, it's roughly 24, 25%.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And like Mark pointed out before, those water and sewer revenues are the big revenue source that are outside of the general fund. So outside of the general fund, the biggest numbers are coming from water and sewer service fees. So. But looking at this graph, it's interesting. I think it's an interesting graph. But you can see that basically that gray line is where we are in 2021, and we're trending up. We are keeping some of these seasonal trends. You can see like that month of February is the December sales. So that's, always our highest month. So you always see that peak there. But anyway, things are trending up year over year in all three of these years. It is a little concerning to see that April point down much lower than last year, or I'm sorry, lower than 2019, and then at the same level as last year. But looking at the detail by taxpayer, it appears that that really is winter storm related, because I was talking to EIC about this yesterday. But we saw especially businesses like food service, restaurants that were closed for like a whole week, and some of the big box stores that lost power for an extended period of time and were completely closed. Those were where we saw the impacts. So it looks to us like it's winter storm related, and hopefully not something that will continue. Let's see. I think that's it on this slide. Okay. Any other questions on sales tax though before we move on? Okay. The next revenue source that we want to talk about is water and sewer rates. So we used an outside consultant and completed a rate study in 2019. And this rate study gave us a look out through 2025 and tried to, help us project what we need to do in terms of rates over a multi-year period. And of course, that was based on assumptions for what our costs would be, through 2025. But definitely these rate consultants made the recommendation that small annual increases were the best way to go, and, that we would continue to see increases in just our costs as far as personnel, chemicals, and then as far as just our maintenance costs and debt service. We had some debt service costs, and we know some of those increase out through the 23-24 time period. So anyway, their recommendation was looking at small annual increases. We did an increase in 2020. And then for fiscal year 2021, there was no rate increase. So our rates this year did not change. So we are looking at considering approximately a 4% increase for 2022. So we're talking about maybe like a $2 to $3 per month increase for an average customer.
Where's that 4% coming from?
I
mean, why'd y'all pick 4%?
So they model it out over a multi-year period, and they look at what our needs are in terms of revenue for both operating and capital expenses that we're aware of, and debt service. And so it's a pretty complex model, but the impact of today's adjustment shows 10 years out even. It compounds to demonstrate what kind of incremental rate increase that you might need over time to make sure you stay in the black.
But
So
along
if I'm
those
not
same
rational.
lines, we are the model assumes a certain growth rate, assumes certain inflation rates, and then looks at existing debt service and assumes there's things that we can specifically build in, like for example the replacing filters on the new TTHM filtration system. That's a new expense in the next couple of years that we haven't seen before, but will be an ongoing expense. So those were the assumptions for the costs, and then they try to match the revenues up with those costs, factoring in assumptions on usage and growth primarily.
If I want to rationalize a little bit, since we didn't have any increase in 2021, we're really looking about a 2% per year
Correct. Yes.
increase, which that sounds better to me than a 4% banger when TPP's at 3.5%. So
Yeah, definitely the rate consultants stressed that as well, and looking at trying to kind of keep things level year to year, rather than say, well, this one year we're going to have this extra filter expense, so we're going to jump it up this year and back down, and but kind of keep more of a level approach was the idea.
Yeah, and there's different strategies that y'all could pursue on that. For example, one of the reasons we didn't have a rate increase last year is because of COVID, right? But you could adopt, been in cities where they'll adopt a 3-year rate ordinance. So they already have it programmed based upon their modeling what sort of rate increases they're going to have the next 3 years. Now they can change that later on through a budget process, or a new council comes on board and says, well, we don't want to do that. but oftentimes they'll just go ahead and do it once, and then it's all set for the next 3 years. But
Well-
it's very small adjustments and not,
It's
you know,
set unless something comes along, then you have to
Right.
reevaluate it anyway,
Right.
so.
Yeah, so on the modeling, was it, I'm sorry, I was signing something, so you may have already said this, but was it approximately 2% per year? Is that what
Yeah.
it is? And that's why we're doing 4% this year is
Right.
to make up. And then back in 2019, our water and sewer rates versus the expenses, did we come out? We came behind budget we didn't balance on that, is that correct?
Right.
We had to transfer.
Well, and this may not be what you're asking, but so we did the rate study in 2019 and 2020. We actually, put that into effect. And at that time, council did pass a rate increase.
Right.
And we did also kind of restructure the rates a little bit to build more in as fixed or base rate and include like the first 1,000 gallons of water. And then we also tweaked the tiers and the volumetric rate by tier to encourage water conservation by having higher tier users pay higher rates at that, large usage quantities.
but the lower users did not see an increase, basically.
Yeah, very small. Yeah, especially like the under 1,000 gallon people, that basically stayed the same. And
So this would be across the board.
well, and that's one of the things that we can look at. And EA, feel free to jump in here too. When we were going through the rate study, definitely the consultants recommended that we try to continue to build the base rate fixed cost more than the volumetric rate. And the rationale is that so much of our cost is fixed. We have to maintain our system. We have to pay our employees, whether it's a dry summer or a wet summer, our costs don't change that much. But when you set everything up to be completely volumetric dependent, then it's just so volatile depending on the weather and conservation or water rationing kind of things. But that is something that as we go through this process, we're interested in council input on, because we have the option of changing the base rate or changing the volumetric rate or a mix. It doesn't have to be one way or the other, but the consultants were more in the camp of trying to raise more fixed revenue so we wouldn't be as in such bad shape as like when we had that really the 2018 floods and then into the 2019 year that you're remembering, where we did have expenses that exceeded revenues because it was such a wet year.
And then the debt, you said that, so we're gonna be paying more at the end of the debt cycle on the debt that we have right now?
Yeah, it's really, I'll see if you can see this debt chart, but, so this is in our budget book, but it's a debt chart where you can see it jumps up. This is, the repayment of the KPUB loan is where it really jumps up there. And that's a short repayment period, and then it drops off significantly after that. So, but yes, there are differences year to year, and it has come down a little bit since this budget book because we've completed the refunding now and of our 2012 and 2013 debt, and so that flattened it out a little bit. But regardless, those years that we're repaying that KPUB loan are much higher. So.
Back on the water rates, just while we're kind of just thinking both sides of this. So last year, we did do, or year before last, the adjustment to the base, which I think was a good decision. But if we continue to adjust that base, that's a regressive increase to our customers. So everybody pays it regardless of your ability to pay, okay? But then the volumetric helps our conservation goals. And so you'll recall that one of our first strategy for water supply long-term is water conservation. So I think the greater conservation rates that y'all put into place 2 years ago have helped significantly. And So as you make some decisions going forward to the base or the volumetric, that's kind of the other side of that argument.
And one other thing that council had asked us to do in 2020, and which we put in place, was a program to help with water, with paying your water bill if you're a low income situation, especially fixed income situation. And so we put that program in place, and honestly, we haven't had any takers on it. I think that the change was so negligible that it didn't spark anyone to let us know that they had an issue.
Well, and you and Julie and your team do a great job of working with people on their bills as much as possible.
Yeah, and we are very flexible with payment arrangements and that kind of thing as needed, but all right, any thoughts on approaches that y'all favor?
I'm interested in what the city manager just talked about in regard to the volumetric increases. It increases the chances of conservation. Okay, but if you just do volumetric, then what does that do to your base rate? What does it mean next year you gotta go back and do the base rate?
Well, no, it just means that your annual revenue is going to be more volatile if you depend heavily on your volumetric, and which means that you need to carry a decent fund balance, right? Which is what we do to kind of even out the ups and the downs from wet and dry summers. And I think just keep an eye on it. Look at it annually. Say, okay, do we need to do some tweaking this year or no? And right now, what's being suggested is just a 2% on the volumetric. I'm sorry, 4%
On the volumetric?
on the volumetric.
4?
Yes.
I thought it was on the base.
I thought it was base too.
When the $2 to $3, I was modeling it on the volumetric. Yeah. But we have that option, and it also can be a hybrid. You can increasing the base a small amount, and then increasing the volumetric maybe a larger amount, or something like that. So it doesn't have to be an all.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Amy, you may want to speak to as well the lowest tier of user. We have a little bit different treatment in regards to the way that increases. Does you may want to speak to that?
Oh, in this model, you mean?
In the previous
In the
rating.
previous?
In the previous rate increase. Yeah, and Gary, to your point, like when this 4% here, the way I was calculating that, I went back to the model and looked at, okay, what is a total bill? And I was using 5,800 gallons. That's an average household bill.
Okay.
And looking at, okay, if I have 5,800 gallons on water and sewer, and these rate increases, what does that come out to in total? And the 4% is, I was trying to do it more on a bill basis, because it does get confusing to customers when you're talking about, percent on this versus this, and, they kind of more want to know what's the overall impact.
Doesn't that go against your previous statement that we have fixed cost and so we need to budget in for the fixed cost?
Yeah, that is what the rate consultants recommended in an ideal world. If you're just looking at
What's best?
what's the best way to set rates, they wanted us to realize your costs are fixed, and if you build a lot of volatility into your model, that's not.
Then why are we building volatility
To
into the
protect the
model?
customer.
Well, from a financial standpoint, the rate consultant, obviously the most stable situation is where everybody pays a flat fee based upon what the total budget needs are, right? Our customers couldn't afford that. And as far as the different tiers, and it wouldn't be,
And it would be regressive.
because those that were using just 5,800 versus those that were using, 60,000 would be paying the same. Because it'd be flat rate for everybody.
Well, I understand we'll still have volumetric increases, but if our fixed costs are going up amount, and it seems like you would spread that among your.
It's not entirely that way. So for example, whenever we have a really wet summer, we do lose water sales, but at the same time, there's two big areas that we have our most savings, and that's in chemicals and electricity. And a lot of times that will offset a significant portion of that loss of revenue, but we do still have some fixed costs. So you have to have a good balance of the base rate being constant and then that volumetric rate, which helps also achieve your conservation goals and then avoid this, regressive kind of cost.
So base rate is a flat fee, everybody pays.
That's right.
And what is that now
It's 15, 18,
per month?
yeah, and that's on the water side.
And that
That's on
includes the
residential?
first 1,000
Yes.
gallons.
Is commercial
Yeah.
different than that?
Yeah, and the commercial is different than that. Let's see, I have my fee schedule here, but to EA's point, what he was talking about is we used to have just a base rate and then everything was billed after that. So, you pay your $12 base rate, and if you used 1 gallon of water, then you pay for that. And in 2020, when we made this change, we took a small step towards increasing that fixed base revenue, and we said instead our base rate's going to be $15 on the water, but we're going to include your first 1,000 gallons with that. So if you use 999 gallons, you pay the $15, then that's it. You don't pay any more for water usage.
So those low users could actually be paying less based on what we modeled out.
Well, we set it so that
that
it was the
wouldn't
same,
be the same,
basically.
okay.
But the idea is, is we're not trying to penalize a widow who lives by herself and uses just a very little amount of water. We didn't want it to be a significant change for that person.
This is not a trick question, but what is the average household use per
5,800.
day?
5,800?
Well, 5,800 a month is our average. So that'd be 193.
I was gonna say 190, doing it in my head.
193 gallons a day.
So we could take that 4% and put 1% to a fixed rate and put 3% towards the,
Yeah, and we have to do
Something,
the math because it
however it
may
would
not
work.
exactly
Yeah, but-
be like that. But yes, we could do a hybrid approach where we increase the base rate a little bit and then increase the volumetric rate at a different amount. We could also, we have a lot of options. We could also look at differentiating those tiers more than we do and, changing the top tier rate to a different extent or, that kind of thing to encourage conservation. Of course, we have to look at the elasticity of demand when we start doing that, and we can't necessarily. It gets hard to budget the revenues because we don't know how much that water conservation will kick in, and people will start saying, "Okay, yeah, it is too expensive now. I'm going to stop."
And I'm assuming then
watering."
that it's staff's recommendation that we do a 4% volumetric.
This is like we don't have a specific recommendation.
Yeah, we're just
at
throwing
this
it out
point.
there
We're just
as a
throwing it out
discussion.
there. So that 4% that I was putting there is a 4% on the total bill, and I was using volumetrics, but you'll have to go back and look at the actual specific increases by tier because
Yeah,
it's
we
not
could get to the same
necessarily.
revenue through a different strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not necessarily 4% on each tier. It's a whole model. and
What
that
if you
kind of
took a
stuff. But
simplified-
4% increase overall is what we were looking at.
Overall. And somehow that breaks
And how do
out.
we get there?
Yeah, and then we can decide, okay, do we want that to be on base or on the tiers,
Yeah.
or do we want to?
And y'all don't have to decide now. When we come back, we can show you, here's, based upon what we're hearing now, we'll bring back 2 or 3 options.
Yeah, and obviously I probably won't be here for that, but I would, as a consumer, I would like to see $1 added to my base rate. So from 15.18 to 16.18, and then the balance of whatever that leaves, we make it up in volumetric. That's just a thought. I'd like to at least see that projection.
Okay.
And I'm not gonna be here, so that's,
well, I would like to see something go to the base. I think it's wise for overall planning. I think it helps. And then do something to the base and something then for the volume, so.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we will bring you back some different scenarios then and give you some options that have a mix of both.
Yeah, I'd like to see a reward for conservation. So I think that balancing it out to where, like you said, Gary, maybe $1.10 or whatever to the base, and then those who
50 cents, I
use
don't
an
know what the number
exorbitant
is.
amount pay the
I just don't know, I mean.
higher
You guys are
volumetric
the
rate.
experts on the conservation side of it. I think the guys that are using 60,000 gallons a month probably don't care.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
But that's the. Well, now we know where Mark stands.
No, I think people that use more should pay more per unit. Absolutely.
You know,
Maybe a little bit different strategy on the commercial side from an
Yeah,
economic
but I'm
development
just saying.
standpoint.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as, we did, make those tiers more steep, in the 2020 rate, restructuring, and we didn't really see the volume taper off in those upper tiers. They seemed to, be
Yeah,
willing
continue.
to pay. It's a little hard to isolate the variables, based on, well, maybe there was just enough rain or, that kind of thing. But, anyway, we didn't really see a significant drop off in volume. So
Wouldn't
it
you
looked
say
like-
that, and I know this is residential only, but the high volume users, it's not because they're flushing their toilet 27 times a day per
Because their
person.
kids spend 30 minutes in the shower every night.
Well, I mean, that could be part of it, but don't you think a lot of it's irrigation?
all of it's irrigation.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's all irrigation.
They
So
keep
it's
their yards
all a chosen.
I think
Irrigation's definitely the driver.
stick to the 4%, bring us some options.
Okay, thank you for the direction. All right,
Here we go.
okay. Yay.
Oh, you get to bring the bad news. Is that what they make you do?
That was the bad news. So just reintroducing drainage fees. You recall, we went through a pretty extensive process in 2019 looking at a stormwater master plan. First one the city of Kerrville has ever done. Identified not every need across the community, but a large swath of some pretty intense needs. That was around 19 plus million in unfunded drainage projects. Certainly, we have annual operational costs right now that are about $250,000 that are built into existing operations that we go and handle basis that we fund via other operational expenses that are drainage specific, but we fund them via street maintenance funds and other public works funds essentially. So those get kind of lost in the shuffle. We have drainage needs, right? They're just unfunded. Stormwater, as we've gone through a number of times, damages streets. And so the philosophical question that was posed to council really at the end of that master planning effort was, how do you want us to move forward with beginning to tackle this universe of need that we've identified that's out there? You directed us to go do a rate study. We did complete that in the early part of 2020. Obviously, the pandemic would begin to ensue at that time. We got direction from council, hey, we're just going to hit the pause button on this. It's not the right time. Bring it back to us next budget year, and let's talk about it some more. And we can talk about the more specifics of that. But essentially, it's a proposed fee-based, based off lot size. State law allows for, essentially, it's a fee based off of impervious cover. So we figure out, okay, what's our typical residential unit, and what is the level in Kerrville specifically that the majority of those average residential units have as far as impervious cover. And then it applies that out across the community based off of zoning usage, and residential lot size. So you may have larger residential lots that have more impervious cover. You may have smaller ones that have less impervious cover. You may have larger commercial units certainly that have that equivalent residential unit of impervious cover, and applies a fee to them based off that. And then that gets segregated into a drainage fund that begins to that can then be utilized to attack both these capital projects as well as those operational needs that the community is already paying for via property tax and other elements.
So every property, let's just use residential for an example. Every property, you go in and every single parcel has to be identified by the amount of land within that parcel.
Yeah, so we've actually, through that study, we've gone through already and identified via GIS and gone through and looked
Every
at all
single
those
one.
different tiers. Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
Like area aerial view. of
Yeah.
them.
So impervious cover would be my house and my driveway.
essentially, for most folks, yes.
Okay.
Y'all have gone through there and y'all subtracted all of that out and,
We did, the
Wow.
consultants did but yes, we got all of the downloads
Oh, wow.
from, the appraisal district and used our GIS data, the aerial photographs.
Oh, my goodness.
Identified it by parcel.
So it's 2 years old, so we've got a little bit of catch up
but
to do.
then you
if we
have
wanna
to,
do-
but then as people have improvements, then you have to
Yes.
revisit that every year.
Yeah,
or-
we
or-
do, but it's a little bit easier. It's not as difficult as you would think because we go through, we're catching up on all those via the building permit process,
Permits.
right? So you do have to, you're not updating your model necessarily, but you are going through and.
Updating the parcels.
That's right, yeah, updating each parcel and then certainly, applying the correct ERU to it.
And what they had recommended on the residential side was just like a 3-tier structure of kind of a small, medium, large.
Not-
And, it
Oh.
wouldn't be like, well, your
Oh.
driveway's this width and your driveway's this
Okay.
width.
Right.
So
I'm
three
paying
tier.
$3 and he's paying $4.
Right,
Yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
we're on the same
That's
block, so
correct.
we're both
Okay,
paying $3.50.
okay.
Yeah, it essentially broke
You
it
just
down
have-
to
you
one,
fit into
one
one of those
ERU
tiers.
level. There were
Okay.
3 tiers of residential, particular to Kerrville, because we do have a wide variation. There's some folks that have a 5-acre lot, there's some folks that may have a 1/4 acre or less lot. And so we did try to have, different than a suburb that may have, very cookie cutter, everybody's got a 1/4 acre lot. We did try to apply, some rational thinking to, and Kerrville has some variation there. From
So if you have no impervious cover, is there no drainage fee?
What's that?
If I've got a vacant lot, do I still pay a drainage fee?
I believe in the model, there was not a base level for no impervious cover.
I'm thinking about you going through all of those properties. Y'all are having too much fun down here.
Well, the consultant did it for us.
That's true, yeah, just trying to make sure we've got the tools in the toolbox for the
Yeah,
policymakers.
and some cities, to encourage green infrastructure and, less pollution in their water systems, like the river, they'll give credits for structures that are green. So, for example, a driveway that's, not impervious.
Okay, speaking
Then you
of
gotta define impervious.
Well, we can
impervious
do that.
cover, has HEB compensated in the, working on the drainage system there?
Yes, sir, they've made some significant drainage improvements in that area. As you recall, part of that discussion with Hayes Street and that drainage that's really kind of inflowing into their property as well as off their property, and the way that flows through, we've made some significant drainage
I
improvements.
remember, the proposal was about doing things on drainage and the streets and so forth.
Yes, sir.
Once it's built, you realize, man, that is a lot.
Yes, sir.
Impervious cover.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really came through in this study. Certainly you've got, basically you've got about 8,000, residential units that were, single-family residential units that were identified here. But you've also got about 8,000 commercial units, and there's a lot of stormwater drainage that comes from large parking lots, right? And so the question, really the policymakers is, what's the equitable way to fund drainage improvements going forward? And should the folks that are causing the stormwater drainage be paying in a different way than the average taxpayer, right? So that's really the question that we want to pose to you guys today, and not looking for answers, really just looking for policy guidance on the right time to bring this to you and how much more, and if this is even the right year to bring this forward.
Oh, yeah, just, not a fair question, but what type of a number, y'all have to have some idea.
Yeah.
And what are we talking about for average, let's talk residential.
Sure.
The average residential guy, are we talking 50 cents? Are we talking $25 a month? I mean,
Yeah, so, roughly, we were, just some very initial estimates, we were looking at, I think $1.55 per equivalent residential unit. And so that, as a comparison regionally, Bernie had a $4 proposed. Fredericksburg had all the way up to a $9 proposed. So that gives you a little bit of a regional comparison on some other entities that have already implemented drainage fees, because they've got the same hill country concerns, right? It rains all at once and the stormwater's got to go somewhere, and and it has to get paid for somehow. So, you know, that from a residential standpoint, that was looking at basically a break-even standpoint for FY '21.
So 155, that's taking the 3 tiers and averaging all of that together. What does that represent? $1.55.
That was based on the average residential impervious area of 3,300 square feet. So
Okay,
that was what our ERU calculation was based off on. And then again, that model for fiscal year '21, we actually did a 10-year modeling exercise looking at capital needs over time, and we had to make some assumptions,
Well,
certainly.
you said 3 tiers, so are you talking tier 2? Or are you giving me like the middle tier? Like, how does that break out for?
Yeah,
for
that's the average tier, which I believe was tier 2.
tier 2. Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things to think about here as well is, I don't think we could ever charge enough drainage fee because it would be so expensive to our residents and our businesses to fund our capital needs. So I think that going forward, the strategy needs to be very similar like what we're doing with streets now. Periodically, y'all will maybe issue COs or GOs to do, you know,
The major
a
stuff.
bond program for your streets and drainage. You continue to do it for drainage. And
This is
then
for the
you-
ongoing issues
And then
that
some
we have.
smaller drainage projects or ongoing drainage maintenance issues, then you use this fee for that piece, as opposed to trying to fund it out of your general fund taxes or not at all, which is, you know, we just don't do. We haven't done drainage projects in years
We've never
until
done
here
drainage
recently.
projects.
So your 155, what would that give you in a year?
We'd have to go back through and calculate. Like I said, there were 18,000 ERUs, I believe, that were identified, you know, on that average unit when you extrapolate it out to the commercial as well. So we'd have to go through and go kind of into the details of the model with you guys and get some feedback on assumptions. Like I said, we really just wanted to gauge the appetite today on, you know, whether you guys wanted us to bring this information back, if this was the right summer, and if you felt like it was the right time for there to be a little bit better equity perhaps in a drainage funding going forward.
I think given the cost to the city of drainage, repair, everything else, I think we've got to look at something like this.
I agree.
By the way, I said pervious a while ago in regard to HEB and impervious, but I've thought about this. When I was at Trinity Baptist Church, and we started buying the houses across Bluebell. We're going to use that for parking. I don't know whether it's a requirement or a strong suggestion that we not pave it. And it's still not paved to this day because you got a lot of runoff because you're.
Well, it actually goes both ways, because when we did River Trail Cottages, we wanted to put crushed granite in it. We got into all sorts of issues with what is it impervious or pervious?
Well, we need to
Compaction tests
beef up
and-
our design standards to allow for it, and we actually are going through that process now.
Okay, but I'm just saying, we've got some cleanup work to do in our
That's
code.
gonna be important, yes.
Because we did it, one from a cost standpoint, but also we didn't want all that
Drainage,
asphalt running into the river right there in front of us. So, I mean, back to the original question, don't want to go down that rabbit trail. Again, I'm not gonna be here to face the consequences, but if we continue to kick the can down the road, it's not gonna get any better.
That's right.
And I think it's up to council to make some tough decisions.
Yeah.
And do I wanna tell the constituents that, man, we're gonna hit you with another $1.50 plus $3 on the water bill, another $1.50 on a drainage? But I think it's
The real cost.
explainable. And I think the average rational person is gonna get it, that if we're gonna maintain the city and have the city continue to grow and have quality streets, then that's my opinion.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I agree. If you want what you want, it's gotta be paid for.
I guess, you know, $1.50 seems very reasonable to me. Not that I know anything about it. My concern, I think, is what Kim was alluding to is, so you have an idea what that, across commercial and based on your model, what does that generate a year? 50,000?
Yeah, we'll dig back into that presentation. We'll bring you guys a more full, robust modeling explanation. But yeah, they went through. They did a really good job of providing. Of course, the data's a little bit aged, but I think it'll give you guys an idea of kind of where that trend's at across those different sectors too of different customers.
So there'll be some science or methodology behind setting it, but then what cities will oftentimes do, because the number gets to be really high on these large properties, is they'll cap it.
Sure.
And,
No, I agree with
and just to
that.
get started.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But again, do you have a number what we think this could potentially generate per year?
I don't have it right off the top of my head.
Well, I'm
Gary.
trying to do the math, so 8,000 residential units at like 50 apiece is 10 grand.
Yeah, but you've got, remember, it's
Oh, that's a month.
18,000 ERUs across the entirety of the community.
That's a month, so it's $120,000 a year, and then plus you got the commercial, so it's probably,
I was remembering like 300-ish, but,
oh, is it that much?
Yeah, which is right around what we were projecting was around the operational costs that we're already covering
Let
and
me ask you
basically
this
being
then,
taken from street funding.
If we set this fund up and it starts generating, let's just use, I'm just playing numbers, 300,000. Is it, for future, can that money be used to fund bonds?
You can. And some cities do that, but then, I mean, it's just a philosophical discussion.
But it can be.
Yes, you use,
Okay.
so then you set it up for 20 or 30 years, and all you're doing is paying debt on those projects that you did 20 years ago.
Right.
Kind of like streets.
So, yeah. So usually what you'll see is a blend of that, and what I'm used to doing is doing some pay-as-you-go, smaller drainage projects, and then some of the maintenance items that EA was talking about that we're currently funding with street dollars, basically.
Let me
So
just
kind of the
say,
silver lining on that is, by doing this, we'll also have more money for streets.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you'll be damaging your streets less because you'll be getting the drainage off of the
Got it.
roadway.
And you still have 19 million in capital projects.
okay,
on,
looking at the, I'm pulling up what they sent last year, so starting at a fee of $1.55 per equivalent residential unit, that would generate 331,000.
Okay, that's-
yeah. Let me just say, on a couple of radio shows, I've talked about this factor of our using streets as drains and the cost to us in terms of to the streets, but also to flooding. And I found people hadn't thought about that. Didn't thought about the damage.
And water is definitely the enemy of the streets, as we've said.
It sounds to me like we're in consensus that we ought to at least look at it.
I agree, yeah.
Well, bring us some
We'll
scenarios.
bring you more back. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, how are we doing on time? What time are you set up for your executive session?
I told him probably about 11, so 10 minutes.
Okay. Now on expenditures, again, this is not just general fund, this is all funds for the current year. As y'all have seen before, personnel are gonna be your largest expense, especially in any service organization. And then capital, which is in this scenario for the current year is 23%, but that's gonna vary widely. You know, for example, when y'all sold the 10 million, and you're gonna be spending that down pretty quickly, that's gonna be a lot different than before we had the 10 million, right? So that number's gonna go up and down pretty drastically over time. And I thought this was pretty good to see that 11% was
I do too.
was debt service. So it's our
Yeah.
debt service continues to be low. So this is a little bit of a background on how we're building the budget this year. A little bit different than we have in the past. What I've asked is for the departments to segregate their new requests from their baseline budget. So, you know, give me what it would take to keep doing what you're doing now. But if it's a new program, if it's a new staff member, if it's a capital item or one-time kind of thing that's new, break it out, make it a supplemental request, and then we'll be looking at those individually and ranking those. So we'll prioritize those based upon your input, obviously at workshops and retreat, and then the city manager's budget committee, which is basically me and Amy and EA, before I bring my proposed budget to you at the end of July. And of course, we do, as I said earlier, include some inflationary increases in our baseline budget as well. So just a little bit of background about how we're doing things differently, just so that we can make some better decisions as we put this budget together. I don't anticipate that it's going to be a cutback budget like the current year, which was less than the prior year. But I don't expect it to be also, you know, gates wide open. Let's do everything that we've always wanted to do either. So anyway, that's kind of the tone that we've set for the budget.
What are y'all using for inflation?
It depends on what it is. It's a range of 2 and 3, and
Yeah, it's 2 to 5%. Some, you know, there's some things like, for example, our software that we buy through Tyler Technologies. I mean, they almost always do a 5% increase each year. But chemicals, personnel, some of those things are more like 2 to 3%.
That sounds
That's
right.
what we're using.
so on this next slide, this will be a factor as we put the budget together in some ways. So we believe that we're really already at the 25,000 population threshold. We're not sure when the census information is going to come in based upon what's going on with the Census Bureau. But we already claimed over 25,000 as part of our CAFR, our annual financial report. And so we'll be asking y'all to actually pass an ordinance or a proclamation declaring that we're over the 25,000 population as we adopt the budget. And what that means for us in terms of costs is that when you hit that 25,000 threshold, then you've got to start offering your retirees health insurance. And it's not that the city would necessarily pay for that, but you got to offer it. So they may pay 100% of the premium, but you still have to offer it. And of course, the other issues that come along with that are things like our ETJ goes from 1 mile to 2 miles. That used to mean a whole lot more than it does today because we can't annex as easily as we could previously. Basically, we only annex voluntarily if somebody asks us to. There are some minor exceptions to that, but we also have some other oversight like the subdivision code and approval of plats and working with the county. We're still kind of sorting through that with the subdivision code. And there's some other things that we also can do. We have first right to annex. So if Ingram, for example, said they wanted to annex in that area, they couldn't unless we said we didn't want to. Okay, so some minor things on the ETJ side. So this is something that you'll see is coming through the budget process.
Okay, on the ETJ, the principle has been, we don't force annexation.
Can't.
Well, since I've been here, yes. And the state law currently does not really allow you to very easily. And so we just don't.
Yeah.
Mike, you may want to comment on that further.
No, that's been the policy since I've been here. We've never, as I can recall, forcibly annexed. Or had any real pushback to when we did annex maybe a small area because of just the way it looked or the donut. We've never had any sort of issue with annexation.
And we don't have to do fire and police to the ETJ?
We don't, but we do fire by contract with the county.
Okay. Right.
So we pay on the ETJ is what you're saying? We contract with them and that, for that area that's the ETJ?
Yes.
Because they serve the entire county, so.
Okay, so
We have
obviously,
some,
obviously not water and sewer.
Some areas we do serve, but that's completely at our election. We don't have to. And our policy has been last several years and maybe even longer that we're not going to provide water or sewer unless you come into the city and are annexed.
Yeah.
Any water and sewer that we do provide outside the city limits is charged at 1.5 times the rate. So pretty substantial increase on rate if you're out there.
and the first right of refusal on the ETJ, does that mean that we have that because we're larger in size? Is that what
Yes.
you're saying, basically?
Well,
Comparatively speaking, I mean, Ingram being the biggest city, or the closest city to us.
right. So it's actually who gets there first. So as they grow and they annex, as long as they don't get into our ETJ, they can continue to do
Right.
that.
But if they get to that point,
Yes.
the bigger entity has the first right of refusal.
And oftentimes you see the larger cities completely swallow up because it goes out so far. It won't be that case with Ingram,
Right.
but
Yeah.
they still have an ETJ that they can grow into. Okay, Amy, you want to go into personnel?
Right. Okay, so quickly, we wanted to get your thoughts here. So, like Mark has said, personnel is one of our biggest costs, the biggest cost. So for 21, just to refresh your memory, we did not give any merit raises for general government employees. We did not give any cost of living adjustment for our public safety employees. The public safety employees don't do merit raises. They have a step plan that, is based on years of service. And we pushed that step plan back by 6 months initially in the 2020 or 2021 budget. There was a 2% lump sum payment given to employees in December 2020, which council approved after we ended the year last year in a better position than we'd expected. So what we're considering for 22, but we'd like y'all's input on is if we have funding available, an average 3% merit raise for general government employees, a 2% cost of living adjustment, and regular step plan raises for public safety employees.
So this is going back, this average 3% is going back to, so it's not really 3% if you consider the lump sum payment.
Well, the lump sum payment is was not on your base.
Right.
So if you are looking at,
You don't look at total.
right,
like-
it's just it'd be 3% on the base, it wouldn't include that 2% lump sum
Because
payment.
it came in as a bonus, not a
Yeah,
Right.
you're right.
salary.
I just mean 3% may not look exactly like 3% if you look at the total that you received
Yeah, it'd be
during the
less than
year.
3% if you included that 2% as part of your total compensation.
And we did go, and as you all know, we did go back and make the step increases retroactively for public safety.
Okay.
What, I know this is hard to know, but, would staff feel good about 3% merit and 2% COLA?
Well, my thought on this is that it's kind of a return to normalcy because this is what we were doing prior to COVID.
Did we lose anybody in 2021 because of the steps we had to take?
There probably was some of that, but I'm not sure that would. We actually kept a lot of employees just because of the uncertainty about the economy and jobs.
Okay.
And so our turnover was not just terribly bad. But I'm sure people went to, like in the fire service, they went to North San Antonio because they could get promoted. And whereas in our, department, there's not as much opportunity for promotion, that kind of a thing.
Do we have any idea what the step plans, what that gives someone
Yes.
in general?
Yes. So just as a percentage, it depends on what level they're at. So they're all at different
Right.
levels, and there's no compression anymore between ranks. And so every 2 years, they jump 4%. There's a 4% increase per step.
Okay.
And then once they max out, then they don't get any more steps.
Step.
But they could still get the COLA, and that's another
Yes.
reason why we do the COLA.
Yes. And as you are projecting, do you feel good about being able to cover all of that?
It's still early.
Yeah, it's still
Okay.
early.
Okay.
Yeah, the property tax and sales tax are the two things that, we're really
Just don't know.
still waiting on
Yes.
some better information on.
But, yeah, still, they have lost because of last year and restrictions we had to do.
So if you bring us those, then, yes,
Okay.
I would say, bring us those numbers.
Okay.
And again, I know, through the hamburger meal and so forth, we've said it, but this council is very appreciative of this staff. And knows we got a good staff. I
Well, most
want
of
to
them.
keep communicating. What?
Most of them.
No, all of them, all of them.
No, we appreciate that, and we definitely
Absolutely.
feel that as well, so. All right, one other, thing on personnel, you'd ask about percentage increases that we're using. Health benefits is one that, right now we have it in at a 5% increase. We are going out for bid at the end of May. And that's one of those also that the timing's real tricky on because we don't usually get that information back before we have to finalize the budget. But 5% is what we are currently, going with, so.
So part of your budget presentation will be a recommendation as to what percent we offer to retirees as part of their as part of a retirement package. If it's, like you said, they pay 100% or they pay 50% or whatever that might be.
My recommendation is going to be, I can tell you right now, it's going to be they have to pay 100% of the premium.
I think the kind of the other issue is though that they could impact the rates for everyone else too, depending on how the insurers decide to rate them. And we've asked about putting them in a separate pool and having a different rating. But you know, if there's like 10 people in there, are they going to be willing to make a separate pool just
Right.
for you know, that group of people, that kind of thing? We don't know yet. So
Well, and it would only be for those that are retiring after you all adopt this.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be retro for
It
anybody.
does not, it's not retroactive.
And they also, it's only up to age 65.
It's only what?
Up to age 65.
So how many would you
qualify for
have?
Medicare.
Explain that.
Oh, so
When they qualify for Medicare.
Yeah.
They
then you don't
go
have to
on
provide it
Medicare.
anymore.
How many,
Oh, so if I've
Do we
worked for you long enough to retire, even though I'm only 55.
Right.
That's who we're talking about.
That's right.
Got it. Okay, okay, that
And their
makes sense.
dependents if they would choose to do that. But
That
that's still
makes
paying the
sense.
premium.
Is
but
that
it wouldn't be maybe a dozen?
It's hard to tell.
Okay.
I mean, we do have quite a few people that are eligible,
Eligible? We do, okay.
but this is gonna, so what's the premium? Total premium is like 500 and,
Yeah, it depends on the coverage, but it definitely could easily be like $10,000 a year that the city pays right now. And right now, that's the city portion, and then, you know, the employers pay a portion of dependents and that kind of thing, so. All right, do we need to wrap up or hit a couple of highlights or?
can we go 5 more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. So keep,
How much time does Mike need?
he's,
Probably not an hour.
30 minutes?
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
We'll go quickly through capital projects. A lot of these you're familiar with. We certainly give you guys an update every month on a lot of these status. As you recall, we've got $14 million worth of capital projects that are occurring right now between general capital fund and water capital fund. So some of those include some of the ones that are listed here. Street reconstruction obviously has been a huge priority for City Council. As you recall, we just brought $4 million worth of projects to you all that you approved that we're launching off on construction this summer. And then we'll be looking at some of the tertiary program priorities. We talked about drainage projects, which we've got some of those ensuing right now. Street maintenance, we've been utilizing some cash funding. We are continuing to increase those levels. As you recall, last year was right around $2 million. We would anticipate, continuing to try to enhance that at about $250,000 every year, if possible, within funding restraints. Heritage Center, as you know, has been through library endowment funds and other philanthropic sources, has been essentially funded from a capital project standpoint. So continuing to move forward that, given the partnership elements that are still in progress. Possible new projects, public safety building, park improvements, golf course improvements, airport improvements. We've got a number of different needs that I know have been expressed to you all in different elements out into the community. So I just wanted to get any initial thoughts from the group on particular highlights.
EA, I have some Lois Street people who feel that our partners need to have a light lit underneath them too, a fire lit underneath them. Anything, are we,
With TechDOT?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're honing in. I saw some email traffic actually last week. We're just, unfortunately, those state agencies that continue to work from home are less than responsive, and so.
Yeah, we've been, it's
But
been.
our design is essentially complete, so we're ready to go let that project as soon as we can get the green light from
Yeah.
TxDOT.
They would like you to light a fire if you can, so
We've got a blowtorch out,
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
please.
On the last item there, I would like to see improved amenities and benefits for the city council.
Okay.
Well, you
What
asked
kind
for
of
council thoughts.
I'm gonna
Like,
vote
we need
against
like a
that.
chair upgrade or?
And Mark, I don't know if this is a good time to mention this or not, but we had talked a little bit about just entertaining the idea of maybe some surveillance in our city parks in light of some of the stuff that's going on with our children. And so I wanted to, you asked me to mention it,
Yeah,
so.
some good feedback.
No, and we talked about, I had some people talk to me early on that subject about some park safety. And wasn't there some TxDOT money available for surveillance, especially we could utilize under the bridge area?
Yeah, so we're looking at a myriad of sources, as we've talked about with you guys, that particularly the ARPA funding, and really trying to hone in on what the details of that, and what's going to be available to us in a bunch of different buckets that may be available beyond just the direct allocation that may be coming to the city. And so some of that may be broadband related, some of it may be, road and bridge infrastructure related. And so we're trying to kind of sort through that, particularly on that broadband category, because we think that may be some of those components related to security may be related to that.
Kind of on the same subject with ARPA, because we're not gonna have time to get to it, but on park improvements, golf course improvements, and airport improvements, that's really where we're looking for possible funding is ARPA, American Rescue Plan Act. Because we just don't have the money, and I don't think we have the capacity to sell the debt. Now, kind of moving ahead, and then we'll close with this, and then I'll just make some closing remarks, is on debt service, the next slide, you do have some capacity that's gonna open up in the next fiscal year. If we keep our debt service rate still at 7 cents. And so you can see Amy's got here, we could issue between 11 and 15 million over a 2-year period, or 2 phases or tranches. And that's using projected interest rates of 2 to 3%. And so, the idea is right now, the focus is on public safety building, but it doesn't have to be. And so that's just something that, if y'all would be thinking about that, so at your retreat, we can talk some more about, what strategy makes the most sense to you all. And we'll probably hopefully have some more information about ARPA by then as well, so that you can have some options.
What's ARPA again? I was gonna write that down.
I'm sorry?
What is ARPA again?
American Rescue Plan Act.
Can you Google that?
Is that, yes.
You can't, okay.
Yeah, and we know that Kerrville is getting $5.2 million through that, 5.18 million. And that's just through a municipal allocation, so it'll be kind of like that CARES Act money that we got last year. But then there are restrictions on what that can be used for, and specifically, it looks like water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure will be allowable projects with that 5 million. But there's a bunch of other buckets that they talked about that we may be able to apply for funding from, and specifically related to airports, arts, humanities,
Safety?
libraries. Yeah, we don't necessarily see that right now in the American Rescue Plan. There's also this infrastructure bill that is, maybe going to get passed. So there could be additional opportunities there. We do know that the 5 million, when they say water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure, that water should also include drainage. But we're still waiting on, more specific requirements from Treasury. But that's the feedback we're getting now, is that drainage would be part of that. But yeah, not specifically public safety in that though.
Okay.
Let me ask, how much are we able to, somebody's staff time, to be looking at grants that we might possibly get?
We don't really have a dedicated person for that. It's kind of a add-on thing. So for example, the police department, Mary Krebs or somebody else gets tagged to look into this, that, or the other.
Yeah,
But we don't have anybody I mean, Megan is doing some of that now, the new senior management analyst. That's why we were seeing something come through with the Main Street, as well as another program that she's looking at. So she's doing some of that, but we don't have anybody that's dedicated to that 100% of the time. Some of Amy's people are doing a lot of the legwork in terms of the FEMA reimbursement and the CARES funds and so forth, but we don't have anybody dedicated to it.
okay. And I don't know what the possibilities are for a city, but anyways.
Yeah, but certainly it looks like there will be a lot of funds available, and we don't want to leave something on the table that we could qualify for, so.
So I, just to be sensitive to your time and your other agenda item, I think we can close there unless there's a question on some of these other slides. I've listed a lot of priority areas under Kerrville 2050 and just kind of ticked off some things that we're thinking about, individual items. If y'all have other things that you would like to share with me that you want to make sure that we consider as we put this budget together, you can tell me now, you can tell me, just over the next couple of weeks or at the retreat. There's still plenty of time for you to do that. I don't want you to feel like this is your only opportunity. But this is just to get you to kind of thinking about those things, and maybe there's something that we've missed as far as something listed here that's really important to you. And if that's the case, I want to know about that so that we can consider it.
Okay.
Yeah, so these slides at the back specifically go through the key priority areas from Kerrville 2050.
And then there's a budget calendar, I think, that was been shared with you as well. So we'll be talking to you some more at the retreat, and then a couple of budget work sessions like we normally do, and the typical public hearings if necessary, and so forth.
I know we're not going to make motions in this session, but we could make a recommendation that for all of the 2022 budget discussions, Gary attends.
I'll second that.
You have subpoena authority, remember that.
I'll check my calendar and let y'all know.
All right, okay. One more thing before we move on to the executive session. Issue that Ms. Hughes referred to about safety in the parks. I don't know what is happening right now, but there is in our community an increased anxiety about pedophiles and sex trafficking. And, I referred somebody yesterday to the chief and the sheriff, but anyway, it's just something we need to think about. Okay, do I hear a motion about our going into executive session?
I move that we go into executive session for
551?
551
07.
072,
Oh, 07.
or 071.
Yeah, 07.
071.
Right.
Mr. Mayor, I apologize, but I've got a previous commitment, so I'm gonna have to step out.
You what?
I have a previous commitment at 11:30, so I'm gonna have to
Okay,
step out.
okay, all right. Did you say 3 as well? No, you just.
No,
Okay,
just one.
okay,
Just
all right.
one.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second. All in favor, raise the right hand. Okay, there you go. All right. 12:02, we're out of the executive session. 12:02, the meeting is adjourned.